This is an in-depth pike push-up tutorial. I'm going to go over all those little details that make this simple looking exercise so difficult to learn on your own, so you don't have to make the same mistakes so many people make and kill your shoulder gains. If you already know all about pike push-ups and how awesome they are, and you just want to know how to do them properly, skip to this time code or to the chapter called How to Do Pike Push-ups. Otherwise, let me briefly tell you about this exercise and why you might want to do it. Pike push-ups are essentially just the push-up version of an overhead press. Both movements train pushing strength for the shoulders and arms, specifically the deltoids and triceps. Overhead press is the more straightforward movement. You hold the bar at your chest, straighten your arms, and push it directly over your head, then lower the bar back down. If you wanted to do this movement upside down, pushing against the floor instead of the bar, you would pike to get your torso perpendicular to the ground, then bend your arms and lower your head straight down. But if you compare this movement to the overhead press, the range of motion for the pike push-up is so much smaller since you can't lower your head through the floor. Doing pike push-ups like this is the equivalent of doing overhead press like this. To fix this problem, we actually tilt our torso on a slight diagonal toward the ground and continue to lower our head down in front of our hands until it touches the floor. Now, making our torso more parallel to the floor means that the chest is now slightly engaged as well. So if you want to purely train your deltoids and triceps without any chest involvement at all, then overhead press is probably a better movement for you. But if you want a more functional skill that focuses on the shoulders but also trains the wrists, forearms, chest, rotator cuff muscles, and core, and also progresses you toward harder push skills like handstand push-up, then the pike push-up is for you. So with all that in mind, let's talk about how to properly execute a pike push-up. You start on all fours in a pike position, which is where you make your legs straight and move your feet closer to your hands, about 5 hands apart. If your feet are closer, it will be harder due to the increased weight over your shoulders, and if your feet are farther away, it will be easier. But you can't just progress the exercise by moving your feet closer and closer, because at some point they'll be so close that they prevent your torso from tilting downward enough and you'll fall forward. To do the actual push-up motion, you stand on your toes, make your torso rigid, then bend your elbows without letting your forearms move backward or splay outward, which essentially means that just your shoulders are moving forward and down. Then you reverse the motion. So that's the basic movement, but let's zoom in on the finer points of technique. As we discussed, in order to lower down in front of your hands, your torso has to tilt downwards, meaning your pelvis moves backward and your chest moves forward. A pike with your feet and hands about 5 hands apart naturally puts your torso in this tilted position. However, depending on your specific proportions and placement, your torso may not already be at the exact precise angle necessary to reach the correct position at the bottom of the push-up without adjustments. If your feet are a little too close, your torso will have to tilt downward more as you lower, which you can easily do by lowering your heels a bit as you go down. If you simply keep your torso rigid and lower your forehead to the ground while keeping your forearms straight, then your heels should automatically lower the correct amount. On the other hand, if your feet are a little too far away in your setup, you won't have to adjust the tilt of your torso, but you will have to extend your head further in front of your hands. And this motion also transfers more weight away from your shoulder muscles and onto your chest muscles. So it's preferable for your feet to be a little closer rather than a little farther away if you do want to train your shoulders more. The tilting motion in your torso when your hands and feet are closer together also mimics the movement in a handstand push-up more closely. So this makes it an even better progression if you do your pike push-ups like that. Anatomically, 2 main movements are happening in your pike push-up. shoulder flexion, and elbow extension. So the muscles that do those movements, the deltoids and the triceps, are the prime movers. But there are a lot more muscles involved that essentially have to act as stabilizers to keep the body rigid while the prime movers do their thing. And it's important that you know what they're doing and learn how to deliberately activate them. Starting from the bottom, your wrists and forearms need to resist the forward motion of the push-up, so your wrist flexor muscles will be activated. Spread and claw your fingers and turn your hands outward slightly so that your pointer fingers are pointing forward. Think about your wrists being strong and stable in that extremely extended position. Your elbows also need to bend straight backwards close to your rib cage in order to achieve a full range of shoulder motion. To do this, your external rotation rotator cuff muscles on the back of your scapula or shoulder blade need to be working. Think about squeezing your elbow inward toward your ribs the whole time. Since your torso is on a diagonal, gravity wants to pull your chest down and make your scapulae retract or get closer together. To keep your torso rigid, the muscles that protract the scapulae or move them apart must be active to keep them apart. Think of actively pushing your scapulae apart throughout the push-up, especially at the bottom of the movement when you're trying to push back up. Finally, your mid and lower spine need to stay rigid, which requires activating your glutes and core. Before the push-up, squeeze these muscle groups and keep them squeezed throughout, imagining them keeping your whole spine perfectly motionless. So that's kind of a lot of little things to think about while doing a push-up. Not surprisingly, mistakes are very easy to make. So what are they and how do we fix them? The first mistake, and the one I probably see most often, is lowering your head down in between your hands. As we talked about before, this majorly shortens the range of motion, which absolutely destroys your gains. To fix this mistake, you can either simply focus on doing the correct technique, or you can train specific areas of immobility or weakness. This mistake comes in two forms. In the first one, you allow your elbows to move backwards, so your forearm is no longer straight up and down. This can be due to weak or immobile wrists. If your wrists are lacking mobility, you can stretch them by simply leaning forward on your hands and knees. If your wrists and forearms are weak, you can train them with pike leans. The other way to make this mistake is to allow your elbows to bend outward to the sides. This may be due to weak rotator cuff muscles. If your rotator cuff muscles are too weak to keep your elbows pressed close to your ribs, you can train them with rotator cuff dumbbell raises. Another mistake is letting your scapulae retract and splaying open your chest. This is most likely due to weak protracting muscles, which you can train with scapula push-ups with or without added resistance. Another very common error people make is allowing the mid and the lower back to arch. This allows the upper body to become even more parallel to the ground, which transfers the weight to the chest muscles and away from the shoulders. This is most often due to a lack of shoulder strength because your shoulders cannot complete the movement without more help from the powerful chest muscles. To fix this, you can work on squeezing your glutes and core harder to keep your spine straight, but you may also have to develop more shoulder strength before you can do a full pike push-up. You can regress the movement by doing pike push-ups on your knees, following all the same technique tips. You can also train other overhead pressing movements like overhead barbell press and overhead dumbbell press. If you follow all these tips and you can do 10 or more pike push-ups with perfect form, then it's time to move on to more advanced progressions. There are two ways to make pike push-ups more advanced. The first is by elevating your feet. This makes the torso more perpendicular to the ground and transfers more weight off the feet feet and into the hands, forcing the shoulders to push more weight. This position also mimics the movement pattern of a handstand push-up much more closely. The other way to make pike push-ups more challenging is by elevating the hands. You can use parallettes, blocks, dumbbells, or the edge of any raised surface that you can stand on. This variation allows you to extend the range of shoulder motion past the point the floor would normally block you. Your forearm should still be straight up and down, but you can now bend your elbow past 90 degrees. You can also combine these progressions for a truly challenging exercise. Okay, so I think that's everything you need to know, hopefully. I love pike push-ups. They are the foundation of my push training, and if I could recommend any calisthenics skill for someone to learn first, it would be this one. As always, may the gains be with you, and remember that you, yes you, are pretty freaking cool. See ya!
I don't wanna die for them to miss me. Yes, I see the things that they've been wishing on me. Hope I got some brothers that outlive me. They gon' tell the story, was different from me. God's plan, God's plan.